All right, I got my third cup of coffee. What do we got for peeps? I see lots of people still jumping in. Who called this meeting anyways? All right. All right. So I see at least 2 people from OWeb, 2 people from PEB. Still waiting for more. People still jumping in. All right. All right. Now I have 3 from OWeb. Robert just joined. Who are we missing from PEB? I see Kimberly.
Greg is here.
Greg is here. One more. Who's? Sorry, it's not coming to me.
Andrea.
Yeah, I got three OWeb members.
Andrea, are you on the line?
Yeah, she's here.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, wrong Andrea. Sorry, I'm confusing 2 Andreas here. Sorry. Andrea, PEB Andrea is, I do
Andrea
not see
Foltz.
her. All right. Well, why don't we just roll anyways? I've got time. All right. Let's call to order. Are we recording? Yep, we're recording. All right. Let's call to order the OWeb Strategies and Evidence Outcome Work Group, Tuesday, May 6th, 2025. Time is 9:02. Just going through the roll call. We've got Robert, Dr. Laura, and myself from PEB, and Greg and Kimberly from PEB, and we'll hope Andrea joins in a bit. All right. With that said, we have enough to roll, and we'll start with the meeting synopsis from last month's meeting. Any comments from SEOW members?
No, this is Kimberly. I make a motion that we accept the minutes as presented.
Okay.
Robert, I'll second.
Second from Robert. All in favor, say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? All right. That is done. Oops, sorry, I just clicked the wrong place. Okay, we're going to move into the vendor management report from Mercer. Who's leading that? I don't have a name.
Hi, Bill. It's Christy.
Okay. Take over.
Awesome. Thank you. Hi, SEOW members. So nice to see all of you today. If we can move to the next slide. Awesome. So first, as Bill shared, I'm going to jump back into our behavioral health vendor partner project. And if you can go to the next slide, please. And one more. Thank you. So as I said, I'm going to follow up to our SEOW conversation, which we had in March. And just to recap a little bit, this was the first step in our vendor management project. And we were doing a deeper dive looking at the behavioral health vendors that are in place, mostly through the carriers, but we also included our EAP through Canopy, which is a direct contract. And just to, again, refresh everybody's memory about all of the vendors that are currently in place, and these are the ones that we have looked at. And so if we move to the next slide, we did a deeper dive into really 4 key areas of metrics in this engagement and utilization, member experience, equity, and outcomes. And really what we found as we did this deeper dive was that OWeb and PEB have a very robust offering of behavioral health programs and resources available. Some of the programs provide a wide range of mental health support for like Calm, Headspace, Talkspace, Spring Health. They really have preventive resources people can engage with, mindfulness, meditation, self-guided resources, all the way up to some of them are offering also clinical care and treating, depression, anxiety, and lots of different things. Whereas then other services are very specialty focused, like Equip for eating disorders and Charlie Health, which is an intensive outpatient program. And so with that, just taking in consideration, then engagement and utilization is going to be different for those different programs. But overall, even taking into those considerations, expectations were below benchmark with utilization and engagement. And so really the findings are that there is an opportunity to engage more people in these programs, and that will be one of the follow-ups that I'll talk about here later. When we looked at member experience, the good news is we really found that through all of these programs that they had good to high member satisfaction. Many of the programs we looked at did allow for members to match with a provider that met their needs. There was a way to search for a provider or talk with a concierge or a champion to help find a provider that meets their needs. Again, that high touch support was available. Some of the programs even have online scheduling, so you can schedule right there and then. And then we also looked at appointment times and those wait times to appointment as part of the member experience. And most of the programs did meet these targets. As we started to look at equity, the good news was that many of the programs were able to report to us engagement utilization by different demographic groups. One update that I wanted to provide you all with today on this is that back when we were looking at the metrics for MODA's Behavioral Health Champions and for Spring Health, it really showed that it was all urban, suburban engagement and no rural. So we went back and looked and asked MODA to check the data and pull it again. And so there was a reframe of that data to show us that actually it is in line with our PEB and OEB populations. And so we do have about 20 to 23% of the rural population did engage in Spring Health and Behavioral Health Champions. So that is pretty close aligned with the overall population. So I just wanted to make sure I provided you all back that update on that data, because that was the one thing that really stood out as being skewed. Again, with equity, most of the programs are offered in English and Spanish, which again is that minimum standard that we're working towards. And in fact, many of the programs also obviously have language line services and additional languages that are available. The ones that are different is Gemini, which is a discrete language modeling program that does not have additional languages available. And there, we did find overall when we were looking at the access and member experience satisfaction that there really was a similar distribution of members engaging in the programs compared to the overall PEB and OEB population. And then lastly, we looked at outcomes. And so not all of the programs provide outcomes. So we really looked at the ones that did and used clinically validated assessments for those outcomes. Some of the programs like Calm they're not a clinically providing a clinical service, and so they don't have necessarily that type of outcome. But they did have favorable results. The ones that had the outcome data, we were able to really see that people who are engaging in those programs are making meaningful improvement. All right, so I'm going to move on to the next slide, please. All right, so then as our follow-up, so our next step was really to come back with our recommended actions and the timeline. Many of these things under Q2 2025 were they're already in process and actually some completed. So today we're talking about our yearly targets for engagement. We are going to start a more formalized process of helping Canopy doing integration with the medical carriers. Canopy has already been in contact, and so really wanting to make sure that there is a reciprocal relationship of referrals, warm hand transfers, and understanding of what the services are, so that members can seamlessly access the care that they need at the right time, and have the guidance from carriers and Canopy to get to that care. With the member experience, we did finalize, we have an upcoming newsletter topic that features support for anxiety and depression. So we finalized that newsletter. Within equity, as I said, I've updated the access information on Spring Health and Behavioral Health 360. So we now know that that is very closely aligned with the general population demographics. And for the outcomes, we are going to be working after, now that we've done this exercise, to develop the outcome metrics and what we want to see to be reported for next year's 2025 experience reflection. Coming up then later in this year, a couple things that we're going to be working on is we really want to work with Garner to surface those behavioral health point solutions in the provider search tool to hopefully increase engagement, and then also continuing to partner and work on communications with the Mercer team, staff, the carriers, and the behavioral health vendors. We really want to work with highlighting those high touch programs for members so that they know that they're there for them, that they're easy access, and that they can get guidance and support. And then also wanting to make sure that the behavioral health solutions are all integrated into navigation tools. One in particular, collective health through Providence. We want to make sure that the behavioral health solutions are going to be highlighted. For equity, we are tracking towards that minimum language standards for all of the vendor partner programs beginning on 1/1/27. And then as far as outcomes, we really want to start developing this timeline for when these outcomes data will be shared in advance of next year's renewal process. Thanks, Dr. Lara. I'm looking at your chat now, and that's a great follow-up. I will reach out to MODA and start that process to see what that timeline can be for that.
Thank you, Christy.
Yeah, you're welcome. And then as we kind of move then into 2026, you can see here we'll be we want to continue this evaluation. So prior to next year's renewals, having this information available again so we can evaluate whether we met our targets that we're going to talk about today next year for our renewal considerations. Again, looking again at the wait time, member experience, to bring into that conversation as well. Again, looking at the demographic information, we want to make sure that we continue to have equitable access, that those minimum language standards are being met, and we're prepared to roll that out for 1/1/27 with all of the vendor partner programs. And then again, evaluating those outcome metrics to make sure that all of the programs in place are continuing to provide value and clinically significant improvement for members that are engaging. Any questions on this side as far as kind of how we've laid out our next steps and actions? All right. So I'm going to move to the next slide. So this is a little bit more detail into these engagement targets. A few pieces here I'm going to share as far as context goes. So from our March meeting, I want to make sure we've taken into considerations and all of your feedback. And so wanting to show, I think, a more simplified, updated table that really is taking what is the current utilization engagement in these programs and what makes sense for us to start tracking for action steps for a next year's target engagement. And so, a couple things that we take into consideration when we're kind of developing these targets is that all of these solutions, except for Canopy, are contracted through the carriers. And that's a little different in comparison to like if it's a direct contract, if we're looking at like book of business engagement metrics for each of these vendors. So that is taken into consideration. Also, we got to take into consideration there's multiple offerings in place. For example, Calm and Headspace, they're very similar offerings. One might appeal to one member more than others because of how they look, or maybe even the way the content looks or the voice being used in some of it. So, but they're very similar. So they're not each going to have a book of business engagement metric. And so that utilization is going to be spread out. The last thing just to keep in mind as we set these targets is obviously some of these programs that are the specialty programs are going to have a much, much lower engagement metric because that, whatever diagnosis, that treatment, that program is treating is going to just have less prevalence within the population. And so with that said, in developing the targets here, we really took the current engagement and we applied about a 25% increase in utilization. Now, I would never propose this increase of 25% utilization if you were at benchmark or close to benchmark, but all of these programs are way, way, way below what we would expect to see with engagement. And so feeling confident that 25% is a good increase in that engagement. And Robert, I think you put let me just read your chat here. So the percentages are based on the carrier in that specific program. Yeah, they're not, it's not for example, Calm, that 3.7 per, actually, I'm sorry. No, it is. It's the carrier's population. Any questions on this? Or other feedback?
Hi, Christy. This is Teresa Cross. Did Canopy change whole life directions or replace it with something else? And I'm drawing a blank on what the name of that is.
Yes, they are proposing that it's going to change. So there will be, but they're still going to have a digital cognitive behavioral therapy program in place going forward. But I do believe their vendor is changing.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. And I think do I have one more slide? Sorry, I can't remember if I have one more slide or not. Oh, I do. Awesome. So then the other thing we did as part of this follow-up is a key component, obviously, of engagement is communication strategy. And so have some recommendations here for carriers and behavioral health vendors as, kind of best practices for a communication strategy. The OHA communication team and Mercer Communications have already a really strong and robust strategy in place this year that they've been working really diligently on. And as I shared before, there are these newsletters that have different topics. They're really taking a very engaging approach this year with just different ways of communicating. And so that is also in place. But this is specifically for carriers and behavioral health vendors. Reaching out directly via email, using the guidelines that have been provided by staff. We do know sometimes home mailers are effective in engaging, family members and people who maybe aren't able, obviously, to access systems and see programs that are available. Also helping to direct members to the microsites, not using the names of programs because oftentimes people don't know what Gemini means or Spring Health, but more directing by what that member might be looking for, or even languages of how they're feeling, and then helping them find the programs that are going to help them feel better. Also really, promoting the wellness guides, directing people to the wellness guides that are available on the PEB and OEB sites that are really well designed so that it's easy to find the information and engage in different programs. We know that having behavioral health webinars are a way to also engage members in a different way and provide that education, prevention resources so that people can learn more and also feel not alone in that with others that are engaging in those webinars. And then also the train the trainer sessions. This is something that Canopy has, I know, been doing some really great work with PMAC and the Worksite Wellness Coordinating Council through PEB, and have had really great success in a train the trainer slides that different agencies can use to provide the resources, get the information out to their members so that they feel more comfortable engaging and know what's available for them.
I have
Awesome.
a comment.
Please.
So the problem is I have a thought without an idea of how to bring it, but I'm kind of wondering, communication to me here is kind of focused on self-identification to engage. And I'm wondering, should we also have like conversation or membership communication on how to talk to your fellow colleagues about behavioral health if you're noticing another member who's in trouble or having issues or is different, and how to bring up the subject of behavioral health with them, and and have some communication along those strategies as well.
Yeah, so Bill, that's a great comment, and it is one we're seeing. So from our Mercer Health and Benefits survey, we actually see about 45 to 46% of organizations are doing exactly that, a manager training. I know Canopy has that type of program available. That's typically where we're seeing that kind of communication being offered is through, a manager training session. Because oftentimes you're right, managers or even our peers, right, are the ones who notice that we're not like ourselves. Something else is going on. And so sometimes, though, it's uncomfortable to have that conversation, or it might feel like it's not, it's not something that I should talk about or something like that. So these manager trainings are really a way to help managers feel more comfortable with approaching that conversation, recognizing they're not there to be that primary support by any means. They're not a clinician. So they're really there to listen empathetically and provide the resources so that that person then can be like, oh yeah, I didn't know I had an EAP, or I didn't know I had, Spring Health or Talkspace or something like that that I could engage with. Great suggestion.
Yeah, and just if we bring that out to all the members that, pay attention to your colleagues, then if you're one of the people who might get approached, you've already seen that, okay, there's been discussion about somebody might approach me, so you'll have a kick in on that thought before it happens. That was my thinking, but yeah, like along those lines of, and adding that to our communication style.
Yep, I got it. I'm writing it down.
Any other thoughts from the board, or actually anyone? All right. That said, thank you for that presentation, Christy. And we'll go on to our last item on the agenda, or next item on the agenda, which is pharmacy trends. Is Sarah with us?
I am.
Hey,
everybody.
Cool.
Yeah, so today's presentation, it's the annual innovation presentation, and it's focused specifically on pharmacy. Dr. Twang wasn't with us this week, so we'll do a separate look at innovations on the medical side at a future meeting. So today we're focused on pharmacy and innovations, and kind of some of the latest and greatest things that we're hearing from the industry. As always, we want this to be interactive, so raise your hand or put questions in the chat, and we'll, as we work through it. So this first slide, I just wanted to spend a little bit of a time, just a reminder of how does the drug development process work? Because a lot of times we're looking at pipeline and we'll see things like phase 2, phase 3. What does that mean? So this is kind of a schematic of how the FDA works with manufacturers to develop new drugs. If the total length of this timeline is typically about 10 to 15 years. There are situations where things can move more quickly for, urgent needs or conditions that are not treated. But for most drugs, it's, 10 to 15 years. And it starts with a manufacturer develops a new drug. They have to do some testing on animals. Then they submit what's called an investigational new drug application, or an IND. And that has to include both details on how they're going to manufacture the drugs and a plan for how they're going to test it in humans. Then they go into what we call phase 1 testing, which is on a small number of healthy volunteers. And these are not people that have the disease that's being tested, but they're looking to see if there's major safety issues with the drugs, identifying side effects, and then understanding how the body gets rid of the drug. Does it go through the liver? Does it go through the kidneys? What's the mechanism that the body processes the drug? If phase 1 goes well, then they go to what's called phase 2. And usually phase 2, we say, has study participants in the hundreds in phase 2. And here they're looking at, does the drug work for the specific conditions? So they usually do use people who have the actual condition. They study short-term side effects. And if it's an orphan drug for a really rare condition, we might see phase 1 and phase 2 combined. From there, there's a plan for phase 3, and the FDA has to work with the manufacturer. How are you going to study this for phase 3? Then we go phase 3, and usually that's in the thousands of participants in the studies. And of course, it's different for orphan drugs sometimes, but this is the standard process. And here they're looking more on refining the actual dose used, trying it in different populations, and understanding how the drug interacts with other medications. Once phase 3 is done, there's a review meeting with the FDA, and they could submit what's called an NDA, or a new drug application. Once that application is submitted, the FDA has 60 days to determine if they're going to do a full review of it and assign experts, or if they're going to send what's called a complete response letter to basically say, we're not reviewing this any further. There's not enough here. They also go through the labeling. They have to do a facility inspection, and then eventually there's a decision. So from that application submission, the NDA, to a decision, it's typically 10 to 12 months. 10 months is the standard with a typical drug. Some drugs are given priority review, and those are done in 6 months. So just a little background. So when we say phase 3, if it's the beginning of phase 3, you're probably 6 to 7 years out from a drug on the market. If it's the end of phase 3, it could be a year.
Sarah, just a FYI that based on your beautiful green line and dots, your middle row is flipped backwards.
Oh, because it's not following them. You are correct.
The green line.
It is,
yeah.
Yeah, it is not following the green line. This is what happens when you use.
I was wondering why phase 3 came before phase 2. I was like,
no, you're right. It goes from phase 1 to phase 2. You got it. Thank you, Bill. All right, let's go to the next slide. So one of the new drugs that just was recently approved this year, it's a new product for pain, and that's getting a fair amount of press, suzetrigine, and I still am not sure how to pronounce the brand name, but I believe it's Journevax. What it is, it's a non-opioid and also it's also not a non-steroidal like ibuprofen or naproxen. It's a totally new mechanism for the treatment of pain, and it inhibits the pain signal. It's been approved for moderate to severe pain in adults. And this is the first new class of pain medication in over 20 years. So it is a pretty good innovation. Now, they studied it in a pretty limited set of people in the phase 3 trials. They looked at people who had an abdominoplasty, so a surgery in their trunk area, or a bunionectomy in adults only. And so there's it's a very limited use case. It's acute pain following surgery. They haven't tested it in chronic pain yet. What they found is that the pain relief was better than placebo, so better than nothing, and there was no addiction potential at all. The pain relief was similar, but it wasn't better than kind of the standard of care, which is an opioid like Vicodin. But again, the advantage is there's no addiction potential. They're studying it now for pain associated with diabetic peripheral neuropathy and also sciatica. Those are in phase 3 and phase 2 respectively. A few limitations of the drug: it does have some side effects. It hasn't been studied beyond a 14-day course. So again, a lot of the utilization of pain medication, especially opioids, it has really been the use of chronic pain. This hasn't been studied for that yet. The other challenge is the pricing. It's being priced at $15.50 per tablet, which comes out to $450 for a 14-day course. There's potential here, I think, for people who have are at risk for addiction or dependence. This is a new option for people to use following surgery. At this point, we're not expecting really wide use because there are other agents that are much lower cost that are available. But this is something to look at if someone has potential for addiction. Any questions, comments on Journevax?
This is a short-term post-procedure kind of pain med, right?
That's what it's been studied for. Yep, 14-day course. There really hasn't been any study on long-term yet. Now, if it's successful in phase 3 for diabetic peripheral neuropathy, that could be a proof of concept for longer use. But to date, we don't have evidence for that. The next slide, we have some of the other medications in the short-term pipeline for pain. So the top one there, condylase. What that is, it's a one-time enzyme injection. It's for herniated disc pain. It goes into the herniated disc, and it actually, it's an enzyme that reduces the volume of that space and can relieve nerve pain. That was submitted to the FDA in 2024. And there's that 60-day period. FDA responded with, we're not going to review this, not enough here. So they went back, they're doing more studies, updating their submission, and they're expected to submit that possibly later this year, possible approval in 2026. Potential benefit of that is not requiring general anesthesia. It's less invasive than a back surgery. The next one there, when you see something with that ends in cell, CEL, with a hyphen, that tends to be a gene or cell therapy. So that's kind of a tip off there for what that is. Rexlemestrocel, and that is a stem cell therapy for chronic back pain. That's in phase 3. We're not expecting to see that until at least 2027, maybe later. Could be up to $100,000 per course. But what's kind of neat about that is it does look like a single injection could show improvement over a 24-month period. And they're testing it in patients who are refractory to other treatments. So this could be a good last resort type option for people that have intractable back pain. The next one, operancerin. That is another new mechanism, pain reliever. It's a serotonin receptor antagonist, and it would be injected. It's an intravenous. They're testing that for post-op back pain. That one is being marketed in Korea this summer, but they haven't filed for IND in the US. They were doing some studies here in 2020, but got disrupted by the pandemic. So I think it sounds like it's a small company. They're waiting to see how it goes in Korea before they come back here. And then on the bottom, SB01, this one is an intradiscal injection of an amino acid peptide, also for a degenerative disc disease. Study is supposed to be completed by late August. So we could see this one as early as 2026. This will probably also be a pretty high price therapy, but again, the hope is it's a one and done rather than a surgery and rather than ongoing pain relief. So it's exciting. We're seeing finally some movement in the pain category above and beyond opioids, but a lot of it is still pretty early in the process. Questions or comments on the pain category?
Sarah, this is Dr. Lara. So just a recommendation because I see that is not mentioned demographic or equity inclusion criteria. So for future reference, can we include that criteria too when we share information with the board, please?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I can coordinate with our equity team. That's a good suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, let's go to the next slide. So this one we wanted to bring up. This shows up every year as anti-inflammatory biologics is a top category for both OEB and PEB in terms of both spend and growth in prescription drug spend. The purpose of this slide is to really lay out that there's a lot of different drugs in this broad category, but there's a lot, actually, they work in a lot of different ways. So big picture, all of these are working to reduce inflammation. And so they're used for conditions like Crohn's disease, rheumatoid arthritis, ulcerative colitis, psoriasis, and a lot of other inflammatory conditions. There's 6 main categories of these drugs, and they're listed along the top. TNF inhibitors, beta cell inhibitors, interleukin inhibitors, what they call selective co-stimulation modulators, tyrosine 2 kinase inhibitors, and JAK inhibitors. And then along at the top in that first line, you can see the names of the drugs. And a lot of these are probably familiar to you that you've seen in some of the top drugs in some of the presentations from Emory or some of the other drug trend presentations. I bring this up just because it's important to remember that not all of these are interchangeable. They work in different ways. And while they all can reduce inflammation, many of them are doing it through a different mechanism. And so they are not all interchangeable. Let's go to the next slide. And so I wanted to specifically talk a little bit about psoriasis treatment. So when we look at the anti-inflammatory biologics, kind of the fastest growing use case category for these medications is for psoriasis. A few things just to note about psoriasis. There's about 7.5 million adults in the US that have psoriasis, which is about 3% prevalence in adults over age 19. Of those, about 20 to 30% have what we call moderate to severe disease. And severity of psoriasis tends to be defined by what percentage of the body surface area is covered and is involved with these psoriasis lesions, which tend to be these plaque-type lesions on the skin. So less than 3% body surface involvement, it's mild. 3 to 10% is considered moderate, and over 10% is considered severe disease. Risk factors for psoriasis, a lot of it is genetic, family history, but then there's also risk factors around cold or dry weather conditions, stress, smoking, obesity. We've talked a lot about cardiometabolic disease, and also heavy alcohol use can trigger psoriasis. There's 4 broad categories of treatment, one of which is the biologics or the targeted immunomodulators. Typically, that is 4th in line, or it can be 1st in line for people that have moderate to severe disease. For people that have mild to moderate disease, usually 1st line is topical therapy or phototherapy. Another option can be conventional oral agents like methotrexate, cyclosporin. We're starting to see the market kind of move away from those as the biologics are gaining steam. So if we go on the next slide, I can show you these are the products that are used for psoriasis. Now this is coming from the American Academy of Dermatology guidelines along with the National Psoriasis Foundation. Along the left, you can see a list of drugs you've probably seen in a lot of the trend reports as growing quickly. Things like, Skyrizi, Taltz, Tremfya, Humira. You can see the mechanism of action, so where that drug fits in that earlier chart I showed. And then along here, this is the level of evidence in the guidelines for the use of those drugs in each of those use cases, along with the annual cost. So just a few things to note. There are differing levels of evidence depending on the use case of the drug. So something like Remicade, which is an infusion, that has an A-level evidence for monotherapy used alone for people with moderate to severe plaque psoriasis. But the evidence isn't as good for some of the other subtypes of psoriasis. And that varies by agent. So again, they're not interchangeable, and there's definitely opportunity for new research. We're hoping to see new guidelines soon. These are from 2019. Along the right is the annual cost, and that's the big challenge of a lot of these products. So the products that have biosimilars available now, the Remicade, the Humira, and now the Stelara, the price for those per year is actually under $20,000, which is a big improvement. But the brand name products or the products that are not biosimilars, they range from about $75,000 a year up and over $100,000 a year. So it's an important drug category for a pretty prevalent condition, but it is very costly. And that's one of the big challenges of these products. Any questions or comments on psoriasis or some of these biologics?
For this particular category, is there guidance from anybody, the FDA or whoever? How do you and your doctor, how do our member and a doctor pick? You could spend 6-7 years going through each one of these for 6 months trying to figure out what's what's the sorting process. How do we know that you have to go with the 100K one, that's the best one off the top?
Yeah, I mean, the most current guidance we have is this 2019 guidance from AAD and NPF. And you can see most of them do have really strong evidence. So it's a matter of looking at what the potential side effects are, maybe what the frequency of administration is. And yes, to Dr. Laura's point, it's older. There's been a lot of new approvals since then. We're hoping to see more updated. But yeah, this is the challenge. Most of the evidence that's out there is coming from the pharmaceutical manufacturers directly. I think we're still waiting for, almost a sequence based on individual member characteristics of what might be the best drug. Dr. Laura, do you have experience with this category of drugs, and how do you approach it?
No, actually, but I know that I'm current regarding the guidelines. So that will be great if we can share with the board, so we can share later on with the entire board. Thank you.
When the new guidelines are available?
Yeah, and actually
Yeah.
there are new approvals, and that's kind of current. I can share some information regarding that if you need some guidance regarding where to find that. But probably you're savvy on that, so I don't need to share that with you. But you can reach out, Sarah, and I can share my resources too. And
Yeah.
also, I would like to know when the doctor is gonna be in our meeting, so I can address direct medical question to him. Do you know when he's gonna be coming back to these meetings? You mentioned in the beginning that
Oh, yes.
yeah.
Yeah, Kirsten, can you speak to that? I think he would be at the next CL meeting. Is that correct?
So
Right,
next
that's
month.
correct, Sarah.
Yeah, the next meeting he'll be at.
Okay.
Yep,
So
he
probably
was
we
just-
can address a few questions. I have that. Christine, I'm gonna reach out to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let's go to the next category. We wanted to talk a little bit about multiple sclerosis, which is another category where we've seen just a lot of innovation over the last decade. Really the treatment algorithms, treatment paradigms have changed a lot for multiple sclerosis. One of the most exciting things is that we saw some oral medications approved in the last 10 to 15 years. And since then, they have become available as generic. And that has really reduced the price and improved access for treatment of multiple sclerosis. So on that right column there, there's Copaxone, which has been the injectable standard of care first line for many years. There's generics available now that are $15,000 a year. Tecfidera, Aubagio, and Gilenya. Those are also all oral medications for multiple sclerosis. They work in different ways, but now they're all available for less than $200 a month. And that's just happened over the last three to 4 years. So it's been, just, I think, a huge improvement in terms of access for people and the ability, to get high quality newer treatments, especially oral options at a reasonable price point. That said, not everybody is a candidate for those medications, and they don't work for everybody. So there are other options available for people with different kinds of multiple sclerosis or more refractory cases. So one is called Mavenclad. So that's cladribine. It has a unique mechanism of action, and it has a unique dosing regimen. So what it is it's dosed over 4 to 5 days, twice a year, for 2 years. So it's only been tested for this 2-year period. It does cost $150,000 per year, so $300,000 for a 2-year course of Mavenclad. It has an indication for highly active relapsing multiple sclerosis. So that tends to be people that are, they're refractory, they're not having success on some of the standard treatments. In the middle is Ocrevus. That's an injectable. It's a monoclonal antibody. When that was first approved, it was exciting because it was the first treatment for a more difficult to treat form of MS called primary progressive MS. It was initially approved in 2017, and it needed to be done in a clinic with an infusion. Now there is a subcutaneous version that can just be injected rather than infused, and that's available in 2024. The price for either version is $82,000 a year. So again, there's a big pricing difference, but Ocrevus is unique in that it can treat that primary progressive. And then there's Tysabri. So Tysabri's been on the market for a long time. It is used for relapsing forms and tends to be people that are refractory. It has a unique mechanism of action. It's never first line. It's typically only used when other treatments aren't working. It carries a pretty significant, there's a potential for a very significant side effect where it's a rare brain infection that can occur as a result. So because of that potential for side effect, it's never used first line, but it can be an option for successful treatment when nothing else is working. There is a biosimilar that's going to launch this year, and that should improve pricing on Tysabri. And then in the little box down on the bottom left, we've got some more products in the pipeline. Sanofi has a new drug. It's completed phase 3, and it's been submitted to the FDA, so we should see an approval this year. Novartis and Roche have similar products that are also in phase 3. All of those could be priced at $100,000 to $200,000 a year. And those, again, are new mechanisms of action different than what we've seen for multiple sclerosis. So we're continuing to see treatment innovation in this category for those people that aren't having success with some of those established treatments. Questions or comments on MS? All right, let's go on and we'll talk a little bit about gene and cell therapy. And we've talked about gene and cell therapy in this venue before, but it's worth another review given the number of products that are being developed and could be submitted to the FDA in the coming years. So this first slide talks a little bit about what gene therapies are and how they work. So big picture is they're a one-time treatment, and they work by replacing a missing or a faulty gene. And so by replacing that missing or faulty gene, they can address a genetic disease that's caused by a genetic mutation. There's 2 different ways that gene therapies can be administered to the patient. There's in vivo, and that means that the patient just gets an infusion of that gene directly. It's usually in a viral vector. It's a simple infusion process. The patient could go to the hospital, they get an infusion, and they can typically go home with often same day. The other type is called ex vivo, and those gene therapies, what happens is cells are removed from the patient. The genome is modified in those cells, and then they're infused back into the patient. And depending on the disease, that often has to happen after the patient receives a round of chemotherapy. So the new gene therapies for sickle cell disease rely on an ex vivo process. In contrast, the drugs for Duchenne's muscular dystrophy or hemophilia, those are an in vivo process, so it's a simpler administration. All of these typically cost over $1 million just for the drug alone, not including the facility fee, the staff, any kind of markup. So they're very expensive treatment. They're intended to be a one-time, potentially curative treatment. Let's go to the next slide. So there's gene therapy, and then there's also CAR T therapy. So the CAR T cellular therapy, this is being used primarily for cancer. And what this therapy is immune cells are removed from the patient's body, and then they're altered to become cancer-fighting machines, basically, and then they're reinfused back into the body. They're approved primarily to treat certain blood cancers like leukemia and lymphoma that haven't responded to standard treatments. Like the gene therapies, they're one-time treatment. They're meant to cure or improve the illness. These typically require a hospital stay, and they need to be delivered in specialized treatment centers. The cost for the drugs themselves is about $400,000 to $500,000, depending on the drug. And then there's also an administration cost, especially since the patient needs to stay in the hospital, and that can be add an extra $200,000 or $300,000 or more. So any general questions on cell gene therapy before we talk a little bit about some of the challenges they're causing in terms of thinking about benefits, and then also we can take a look at the currently available products in the pipeline.
Are these kind of things only available at big research hospitals, or are they available generic or ubiquitously?
They're not available ubiquitously. They tend to be at specialized facilities that have the specialized training, especially the ones that require that ex vivo administration, or CAR T. Yeah, they don't tend to be available everywhere. Some of the gene therapies will only ship to certain facilities that are in their network that have received specialized training from the manufacturer. Let's go to the next slide. And so on one hand, these medications are, they're really allowing us to treat diseases that, that were previously untreated or uncurable and are allowing for potential cure. So it's really exciting from a science perspective. And at the same time, there's challenges around the price tag, and also it's less predictable, right? It's fairly easy to predict, how many people might have, a certain condition, but how many people might get a rare form of cancer and need one of these CAR T? How many people might be born with a condition that might need, a specialized gene therapy? It's really difficult to predict. And so the cost to the plan can really fluctuate year to year as we get more of these drugs on the market. They've been tested for safety and efficacy. They've been through the phase 3 trials, although they're a very small number of patients because they tend to be rare conditions. But what we don't have is long-term data. So they're intended to be curative. We don't know yet how long the cure will last. We're hopeful that the cure will be durable and last for the patient's lifetime, but we don't yet know for sure. Let's go to the next slide. And this slide is just a comparison generally between specialty drugs, which we talk a lot about, and then this new subcategory of specialty drugs, gene and cell therapy. And so specialty drugs, like what we saw with the anti-inflammatory biologics, they tend to range between 80,000 and 140,000. By contrast, these gene and cell therapies typically are at least 250,000 up to 3 million. We've actually got another drug approved now that's over $4 million for one dose. The outcomes with specialty drugs in general, you're hoping for control of the disease, improved quality of life. With gene and cell therapy, you're hoping for it's a one-time dose and it's a cure, or at least a sustained response over many years. To Bill's question earlier, specialty drugs can be self-administered or they can be given in a specialized setting. With gene and cell therapy, it always needs to be given in the highly specialized setting due to just the additional complexity. With specialty drugs, we can see them on the medical benefit or the pharmacy benefit. Cell and gene almost always shows up in a medical benefit claim. It's very rare for those to come through as a pharmacy benefit claim. Specialty drugs, we see them for a wide range of conditions, like we saw for psoriasis, 3% of the adult population. That's not a small number of people, whereas cell and gene therapy tends to be a much more limited number of people who might have the disease that could be treated. Let's go to the next slide and we can see which products are available today and what we're looking at in the near pipeline. So on the left 3 columns here, these are gene and cell therapies that are currently approved in the market, along with how they're priced. You can see that Cabildic, that's brand new. It just got approved earlier this year. It hasn't been marketed yet, so we don't know the price, and that's why it says TBD. And then the third row that has the little cancer ribbon, those are the CAR T treatments for cancer. So you can see those tend to hover around the $500,000 range, whereas most of the gene therapies tend to be a higher price point. One thing that's kind of worth noting here is we're really seeing some differential in terms of which products are getting a lot of uptake in the market. And so the products for hemophilia A and B, as well as for sickle cell, there's been very few cases of members actually receiving those medications nationwide. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Some of it is there are other treatments available in some cases that patients are comfortable with, and maybe they don't want to be the first in line to get a gene therapy. With sickle cell disease, that product it requires ex vivo administration. Patients need to get chemotherapy, and there can be impacts to long-term fertility. And so they have to think about things like fertility preservation if that's something that they want in their future. And that can be a barrier for people. And so we're really not seeing a lot of uptake of those medications. By contrast, Zolgensma, and then that top one, Elevidys, for Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, that one we're seeing kind of across all of our clients, a lot of interest and starting to see a lot of utilization in that one. Those are conditions where there really is not a good treatment available. They're progressive genetic diseases that people don't get better. And so the hope is that these gene therapies are an option. So far, I think what we've seen, the evidence for Zolgensma is quite good. Those babies are hitting milestones. The evidence is more mixed for Elevidys. But again, people don't have other options, so they're wanting to try it. I saw a question that came in. Sorry, let me read my chat. Oh, yeah, restructuring on biotech companies. So the question was around insights on restructuring activities among the biotech companies around these gene therapies. So, for example, Pfizer's decision, there was another hemophilia B gene therapy, Becvez, which isn't on here anymore because it was pulled off the market. They were not getting a lot of utilization. So kind of for the reasons I mentioned, there's not a lot of people kind of standing in line, knocking on the door, wanting to get a hemophilia gene therapy, especially if they're managed well with existing factor products or something like Hemlibra. So I think the market wasn't there. So Pfizer pulled that one off the market. Bluebird Bio was sold to a private equity firm. Yeah, similar situation there. I don't think the level of utilization didn't quite match maybe what the projections were. And so, there's some restructuring in the market. But again, yeah, that Elevidys and the Zolgensma, those are getting a lot of utilization. And we're hearing from a lot of clients about those medications and the costs hitting the plan. It's a good question. If we go to the next slide, this one just shows some of the pipeline around gene and cellular therapy. So this actually came from a Q4 2024 data report from the American Society of Gene and Cell Therapies. And a few things are interesting here. So that chart on the left, it's divided out by the different phases with the FDA. So you can see the bulk of medications are still in phase 1 and phase 2, but we're starting to see at the very top that pink pre-registration portion of the bar is growing. And that means we're going to start seeing more and more of these hit the market over the next year or two. And then on the right, those are the number of gene and CAR T therapies in development. What's really interesting here is, at the bottom, cancer, of course, counts for the majority, and then rare genetic diseases. But if you look at those other products, the other types of diseases that are being studied for gene and CAR T therapy, some of these are much more common conditions. And so there's potential, depending on where this goes, for some much more broad use of gene and cell therapy in the future as some of these new treatments work their way through the pipeline. And that's something we're continuing to watch. Any other questions or comments on cell and gene therapy before we move on and talk about HIV?
Be interesting to, kind of noting the the multiple factor of cost that might be coming, in the next 10 years as we're treating some of these diseases, although they're not large number of people, but they become more popular, right? How actuarial projections are going to show the cost coming down versus the number of people engaging in these higher cost things, and how that's going to affect the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And just the difference in the uptake, depending on the disease state, has really been pretty fascinating over the last few years. I think initially the industry was thinking, all of these were going to have this rapid uptake, but that hasn't happened. The uptake has really been by these diseases that don't have other treatment, and they seem to be serving as the use case right now. CAR T there's been a lot of uptake on CAR T for cancer. And again, these are people that are kind of at the end of the road of their cancer treatment. And they're looking at either CAR T or a stem cell transplant. And we're starting to see more CAR T there. In fact, I think we saw one come through potentially for PEB just this week. So it's those are definitely happening.
I think it's one of those, like when people are trying to figure out, like they're trying to balance, I want to live, and
Right.
There's choices. And I mean, it's got to be the roughest time of their lives. I just can't even imagine how you find a doctor that's knowledgeable, that will direct you, versus somebody that's not paying attention to what's out there that maybe could save your life. I mean, yeah, this has got to be really rough for people that are trying to balance wanting to live and still be a member, one of our members. I mean,
There's a financial component to that as well, right? So, because you're going to have to move, right? These are not something you just go down for 3 days and be at some specialty place. You've got to have financial ability.
Yeah. The CAR T is at least 7 days in the hospital, right? That's
right.
Significant amount of time.
And you hate to try to figure out, what is my life worth? What they don't want their families to be left with. I can't even imagine what this is like for somebody. So.
And the question is there a longer term addressing that fact that, one, you have to have the financial ability to even make the choice. And then 2, how do you deal with the long-term financial impact to your family?
Yeah.
Right.
Thank you.
Great comments. Okay, let's go to the next slide. And so this one is just it's an updated version of what we discussed last year around HIV treatment and prevention. So on the left, we've got longer acting treatments available now, both for treatment and for prevention or pre-exposure prophylaxis for HIV. We are expecting to see even longer acting versions for PrEP coming later this year, next year. So we're expecting the FDA could potentially approve Gilead's new PrEP product, and that's just dosed every 6 months. So it's an every 6-month injectable that can prevent transmission of HIV. And then Merck is testing an annual implant for PrEP. So the goal is, by making it easier, for people to do their PrEP, they're less likely to contract HIV. There's some new treatments and combinations in the pipeline. Trozargo was approved a couple of years ago. That was the first monoclonal antibody approved for HIV treatment. But we're seeing more research around what's referred to as broadly neutralizing antibodies. And it looks like in the early trials that you can get a long-acting infusion, and it's looking like in a significant portion of people who receive it, up to 40%, that the virus can go into remission for 72 weeks. So if that research continues on that pathway, that could be an exciting treatment for HIV. And they're also studying those for prevention. Vaccines, the HIV vaccine remains elusive. They have tested a lot of mechanisms for HIV vaccine. One that was the most promising was abandoned in 2023 because it didn't seem to work. And then, unfortunately, there were some funds for HIV vaccine trials. They were recently suspended as part of the CDC reorganization. So it's unclear if there's going to be funding for additional HIV vaccine trials in the near term. They were studying an mRNA, so that's the similar technology that was used for the initial COVID vaccines. They were creating that, looking at a vaccine for HIV using mRNA. Unfortunately, the phase 1 studies are identified this unexpected hives reaction in 7% of participants. So I think they're going back and seeing what's causing that and trying to better understand. So again, that's phase 1. So we're, a decade out or more there. And then we just talked about gene therapy, gene cell therapy. So one thing that's kind of interesting is some genetically modified HIV resistant, they're called stem-like cells. They're not stem cells, but they're similar. They're testing those in monkeys right now. And what they're doing, the goal is to shrink the HIV reservoir. And the HIV reservoir is where the HIV virus kind of hangs out and hides in your body. And it's why HIV is so notoriously difficult to treat, and why we haven't ever been able to find a cure. So they're getting some early results there in the animal trials. And then we're in very early trials looking at CRISPR gene editing as a potential treatment for HIV. But that's very, very early, even pre-phase 1. So that's kind of where we are for HIV. For now, the biggest innovation we'll see in the near term is these longer acting PrEP. So the goal of preventing the disease rather than a treatment. Any questions on HIV before we go on to some new innovations in weight loss and obesity treatment?
This is not a question in HIV, but just in general. How do you see the research going on in getting injectables, as in like vaccines and things like that, to get past the digestive boundary, moving them to oral? How do you see that research going?
Ooh, it's like I planted you. Let's go to the next slide. And you're referring to for obesity treatment?
Well, that too, and vaccines, right? In general, right? But I remember now you're talking about this because I asked the question there about weight loss. Yeah, so I was just thinking vaccines though. Anyhow, keep going. Keep going.
Yeah, vaccines. I haven't seen a lot of momentum on an oral version of a vaccine because the struggle is always, how do you get through the gut, right?
Right.
Like you mentioned. So I haven't seen much movement there, at least not yet. So when we look at weight management or obesity treatment, the pipeline here continues to be very robust. There's 147 new drugs in development across phases 1, 2, and 3. There's 11 major manufacturers that are testing medications, and there's 11 different mechanisms of action. So we've talked a lot about GLP-1 receptor antagonists, but there's a lot of other mechanisms that are being studied for obesity treatment as well. And let's go to the next slide and talk about some of the oral medications. So this is an exciting development. We could get approval for these in early 2026 or earlier. So the first one is semaglutide. And semaglutide is the same active ingredient that's in Ozempic. It's also in Wegovy, which is approved for obesity treatment. An oral version is available as Rybelsus, and that's currently approved for treatment of type 2 diabetes. FDA approval for the drug for obesity treatment is possible as in 2026. It's made by Novo Nordisk, and it's a GLP-1 peptide. And a peptide is a really long molecule, and it is challenging for that to absorb through the gut. And so people do need to take much larger doses of GLP-1 when they're taking it orally, rather than when they're doing an injection like with Ozempic. The way it's expected to be dosed is once a day as a tablet. The trials look like an average weight loss of 13.6% of body weight. And people that were in the trials, their baseline body weight was 233 pounds. So that's a significant and clinically meaningful amount of weight loss. Anticipated cost, nobody knows. The manufacturer hasn't revealed that yet, but we're anticipating $800 to $1,500 a month. Rybelsus, which is the treatment for type 2 diabetes, is priced at just under $1,000 per month. The other product that we could even see sooner is slightly different. That's orforglipron. That is being manufactured by Eli Lilly. That one, they've got their phase 3 trial done. They're doing some additional trials, and we could see approval late yet this year for obesity treatment. And then it could also get an approval for diabetes in 2026. What's unique about this one is rather than it being a peptide, it's a small molecule. So it's just a small chemical compound that can fit into that GLP-1 receptor rather than being a full GLP-1 peptide. That means you can take a lower dose orally and it can get absorbed. It's once a day. It's with or without food, unlike the semaglutide that needs to be taken with food. So there's fewer restrictions for this Lilly product. The early data looks like weight reduction of 8.6 to 12.6%. And the baseline body weight in the trial was about 240 pounds. So again, this is considered clinically meaningful weight loss of over 5%. Wall Street is projecting this is going to come in at under $1,000 a month list price. What could get really interesting here is, with these oral agents on the market, what happens with the pricing for the injectables? Could the manufacturers offer some additional rebates? Might they compete for placement on formularies, and that could bring price down? I think we're hoping that the addition of some more competition could move down the prices overall, especially as we can start to see the market get saturated. So that's the hope. Many of you might have seen the news. CVS, which is of course one of the largest PBMs, announced last week that they are changing their formulary strategy. And so they're going to exclude Zepbound from the formulary, only approved Wegovy. And they're announcing that they were able to get significant price concessions by doing that. So if we get more products in the market, hopefully we can see more of that kind of activity that can move us towards more sustainable pricing overall. Other thing I wanted to note, Pfizer, they've been available, or they've been testing in this space for a long time, but unfortunately they announced they were discontinuing their clinical trial, their oral GLP-1, which was similar to Lilly's. There was a liver injury that turned up in a trial patient that caused some concern, and so they're discontinuing that. So these are the near term, but again, this is the beginning, not the end of obesity treatment. We saw that pipeline is full, almost 150 products in development. Questions or comments on obesity treatment?
So as far as reducing your your effects when we say reduce your BMI and all those kind of things to affect your cardio health and liver health and things like that. This style of weight loss is in the same category. I'm asking, like, that will affect your cardio and liver health, or is this a different, does it leave the fat around your liver and do it in a different way and still leave you at risk for the things that we talk about reducing your BMI? I'm kind of a simple question. Too basic of a question, maybe. Right?
Yeah, so these, work by targeting the GLP-1 receptor. So they're going to work similarly and expected to have similar effects as like Wegovy and Zepbound. Based on what we know and what we've seen so far, yes, the weight loss does seem to improve both liver health. We're expecting we could see an indication for one of the GLP-1s for the use in MASH, which is a non-alcoholic liver disease, cardiovascular improvement. So yes, it does seem that it should improve those cardiometabolic conditions. The challenge of all of these is when body weight is lost, a significant portion of it does tend to be muscle mass. And I think the manufacturer's own studies have shown like it's 40% of the weight loss tends to be muscle mass. So it is really important that people are not only taking the medications, but also engaging in strength training and doing all they can to preserve that muscle mass long term, both just for musculoskeletal health, but also for improved metabolism, because we all know that muscle burns more calories and is more efficient than fat tissue.
But there's still a little bit of factor of trading one bad thing for another.
We don't know, right? Long term, these drugs haven't been studied for decades, right? So we don't know what happens 20 years from now. But we do know there does seem to be cardiovascular improvement for sure in the short term.
And that's with the data from our type 2 diabetes people taking GLP-1s for the last 15 years.
Yep, we have data on people with diabetes for the last 15 years. And now we're getting to be about 5 years of data almost on people taking them that don't have diabetes for obesity treatment.
Got it.
Yeah, but the impact of the muscle mass loss, right? That's going to be multiple years out. We don't know yet the effect. But if people stay on the medications and or they maintain that weight loss, we know that there's significant cardiovascular benefits. We also know that a lot of people don't continue on the medications, and that creates a challenge too.
Because of the injectable side effects, right?
Because of the injectable side effects, or because of cost, or probably a lot of different factors. But yeah, I think it's one study, it was less than a fifth of people were still taking the drug 2 years in.
Got it.
Any other questions, comments on obesity treatment or on pharmaceutical innovations overall? This is the end of I think this is my last slide.
It's a lot of interesting information there. That's a great update. Interesting to see how it's going to affect, the physician decision-making process, as a lot of products are coming on the market in large category areas such as pain management, and how that's going to get derived through. A lot of stuff here I see for autoimmune kind of things as well, which is kind of just on its own in its infancy in research, even though it's been around for 40 years.
It's exciting and challenging.
Yeah. Any other comments from the board or from the work group? Sorry. All right, let's hit the last section here for the last 10 minutes, looking forward.
Great, thanks, Bill. If we could go to the next slide, please. So next month, we'll be meeting here as a group to choose the focus for the summer research groups, but the main SEOW committee meeting will take a vacation also over the summer in July and August and come back together in September with a new work plan. So we wanted to end the SEOW meeting today by revisiting the SEOW work plan framework, which was first introduced and adopted by the SEOW committee in June of 2023. And it just talks about how we focus the work that we do within SEOW to help OEB and PEB achieve their board goals. So the first focus of the SEOW work plan is on strategy, helping the boards achieve their goals by providing clinical oversight and guidance of carrier and vendor partners. Certainly, we've been doing a lot of that with the vendor partner work. You heard from Christy earlier today about some behavioral health vendors. And next year, we'll be talking about our broad suite of cardiometabolic vendors as well. SEOW also works on the advancement of healthcare by exploring leading edge physical and behavioral health and social benefits. So you heard from Sarah Drake actually about pharmacy innovations today. A function of the SEOW work plan is assessment to assess the ongoing value of OEB and PEB's current programs to ensure high quality, efficient, and member first care is being provided for the best value. Certainly that has even more importance now with costs escalating the way they are, and especially as we start to wonder if we're really achieving the outcomes with some of these programs that were originally promised to us. Accountability. SEOW drives better delivery through public reporting and discussion of vendor and carrier clinical performance. We have several meetings where we look at medical clinical performance metrics. We have behavioral health care performance guarantees now. We also have dental clinical metrics that have some fees at risk. So next year we'll be able to bring in all of those topics and look to see if we're making improvements in the areas where we intended. And then opportunity, I'm probably most excited about opportunity for us, just given the climate of the renewals for both OEB and PEB this year and everything that's going on with member health and provider networks and the provider workforce. It's just a very dynamic, challenging also landscape right now with healthcare. With challenge comes a lot of opportunity, and we have really engaged teams on the Mercer side, on the carrier side, within our SEOW committee and within OHA staff as well, all working together to really understand what is driving the health and outcomes of our OEB and PEB populations and what can we do to make them better. And that will certainly be a key focus for us next year as we all work really hard to set up for an excellent renewal season next year. Thanks, Bill. Back to you.
All right. Comments about our planning strategy session for June's meeting. We'll also have a quick thing about, as all of you know, I'll be falling off the roster here, and that will then reserve a spot for somebody from the OEB board, and then we'll have a PEB member take the leadership of this team and maybe have a vice chair from the OEB side in case there's an absence by the chair. And we'll just keep flipping that back and forth between the chair and the vice chair being back and forth between PEB and OEB. So questions on that? Okay. Discussion in general about anything you want to do for the next upcoming meeting for the summer work groups and getting strategy together. We had a comment earlier from Dr. Laura about adding a little equity piece into our planning for the future, right? Making sure that we always take into account that equity piece. With that said, Rose, any public comment?
No public comment.
All right, last chance before we adjourn for PEB members. Next meeting is whenever your next meeting is for OEB. We'll be seeing you at 1 o'clock.
So the only thing I would comment on is that this is Nurses Week and Corrections Week and all sorts of public servant week. So if you see anybody out there, just remind them that they matter So that's why today's favorite sports day. So normally I'm not in a jersey here at the prison, but so anyway, but just, thank you to all of you on SEOW and all of you that have, there's probably lots of professionals on this that I don't even know of that are in the medical field, or obviously Greg is in corrections with me. So hopefully you guys have a safe, healthy, happy, I call it it's a fattening us up week, and it should be more about exercise and health, but it really is a week that we just feed everybody. So, but thank you.
Good one, Kimberly. It's also Teachers Appreciation Week.
See? Yep.
Yep.
Everybody, we're celebrating them all. Yeah.
Celebrations, Bill. Thanks for doing everything that you've done for OWEB, and it's been great working with you for the past 5 or 6 years. I've lost track of the count, but I wish you well.
Yep. We'll do a peaceful transition of power in June, first Tuesday in June. All right, thanks everybody. See you OWEB members at 1 o'clock.